Good morning, everybody. How's everyone doing? Good. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for Ivan for the invitation. It's great to be here in Orange County. And yeah, my name is Jotham Hung, and I kind of have an interesting job. I touch mud for a living, and I make objects out of clay. Just a raise of hands, how many of you have tried ceramics before or made things that, wow, I'm impressed. Was it hand building, wheel throwing, both? Shout it out. Hand building? Okay, so I'm trying to gauge where everyone's level of knowledge is with ceramics. As most of you may know, it's kind of a technical craft. There's a big oven involved, there's dirt involved, and a ritual involved. And if we can do next slide. This is where it all began, right? This is a cup. And I'm a potter. So I make pottery, I make sculpture, I make functional and non-functional objects. And how many of you have a favorite cup or a favorite mug that you drink in the morning or use in the morning? Kind of an interesting thing, right? Thinking about why we have these favorite objects that we use. And I want to talk a little bit about why this cup or pottery is such an interesting object. Right? Not many things touch our lips, right? Maybe our partner, maybe food, and our favorite cup, right? So we all have these things that we use that have more meaning, and that might be associated with coffee or tea or your favorite beverage. So I've had the privilege of making pottery for over 10 years now. And part of the presentation today is I'll talk a little bit about where I started and where I'm at now. So I'm sort of in a phase where I'm deconstructing kind of what I've known to be my identity, right? Having been a potter for so long has been a really interesting thing and a great honor to make objects that people can use. Next slide. So historically, I've made things like cups, right? Mugs. Next slide. Teapots, right? Just your everyday functional object. Next slide. And after about 10 years of working in ceramics, I've also had the privilege of teaching, right? I've taught at Art Center in Pasadena, if you guys know where that is, Art Center College of Design. I've taught at the American Museum of Ceramic Art. And it's been a really great journey to share and talk about my passion for clay and teach people about this material. So after about 10 years of working in clay, I've begun to work around things like material waste, right, and failures and mistakes, right? What does that mean? So in the ceramics world, there's elemental, like natural elements that you work with, like mud, right, dirt, fire, right? Is everyone familiar with kilns, right? All pottery goes through like 2,000 plus degrees of heat. And once you put something into the kiln, there's a lot of uncertainty involved, right? And as you can see here, can everyone kind of tell what's going on? Right? I'm breaking material in my hands, and these are just elements of waste, right? And throughout the process of working and making pottery, I've begun to start thinking about, okay, I've made the same thing over and over and over again, right? Can anyone relate to kind of repetition and kind of getting bored of what you're doing, right? So part of my ritual in my art practice is literally degrading the work and then keeping material waste and failures and things that I've broken or things that have exploded in the kiln. And this relates back to how my parents they're poor Taiwanese immigrants, and they came to the US about 30 years ago. And I was wondering, like, why are they hoarders? Right? Are there any children of immigrant parents here? Wow, quite a lot. Can you relate to hoarding? Or why is my parents' house so messy? There's boxes everywhere and there's stuff everywhere. And people are laughing on that side. But in a way, I think that's a subconscious ritual, right? Thinking about, okay, holding on to things, right? Letting go of things, right? And what does it mean to have a ritual, right? Versus pattern, right, or routine, right? I think a ritual is something that, can everyone hear me well? I realized I was talking like this. So I don't normally use a mic. Better? 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 So I think about ritual like there's more meaning, right? Maybe on the spiritual side or the emotional side, right? If you let go of a ritual, what happens, right? It can throw off your whole day or change the whole process. So within my ritual practice, I know that I have to do these things in order to yield good results, right? So what's the difference between a conscious ritual and a subconscious ritual? So talking about like your favorite cup, right? That might be a subconscious ritual that you're not fully aware of. But when it comes to making artwork, right, it's a constant dialogue that I have with myself and with the creative process. So with the breaking down of the work, right now you see a lot of process photos, but if you want to click next slide, you start seeing kind of how the work kind of manifests itself, right? So I'll use material waste. Have you guys tried wheel throwing before? Right, raise your hand if you've done wheel work. Quite a lot. So you guys know that bucket of water that you put your hand in, right? And there's sludge at the bottom of the bucket, right? One day I was working on the wheel and I was making like really quote unquote perfect things. And I got bored and I was a little angry too. And I said, why not just put my hand in the bucket, right? And then kind of wipe the sludge or the slurry on top of the work, right? Next slide. I don't usually look this clean in the studio. This is a very rare sight. So you see that I have this perfectly thrown form, and I start to put these kind of sculptural elements on it. And this is where my new voice in the work has come out of, right? This kind of experimental, kind of intuitive way of working, right? Not so much conscious, but maybe more subconscious, right? You guys following me when I'm talking about the subconscious versus conscious, right? Next slide. And here are some finished works. And I have these pieces in the ceramic show in Chinatown. Are you guys familiar with Chinatown in Los Angeles? So the show is up for about 2 months. And if you guys want to come, you shoot me a DM, and it's open by appointment only. And it's obvious that there's this kind of perfectly thrown form and there's elements of kind of brokenness, right, fragility, material waste that I'll exude on the surface. And why am I doing these things, right? Why am I putting all these kind of unorthodox elements on top of these surfaces, right? Like, what's the point? So I like to question things that are quote unquote beautiful, right, or perfect, or what does it mean to have like trash, right? So dating back to my parents' kind of upbringing, they were hoarders, right? And nothing was ever thrown away. And in my house, I'm quite minimal, right? But in my ceramic studio, I'm like, oh shit, I'm becoming like my parents. And that kind of came as an epiphany when I was on the wheel and started kind of dabbling with using elements that we don't normally use in the art practice. Are there any full-time artists here or painters, sculptors? Any hobbyists? Cool. What medium do you work in?
Mixed media painting collage.
Mixed media painting collage. Any other mediums here?
Does photography count?
I would say so. Yeah, I know photography, there's like a debate for, is this fine art, is this art? But totally. Cool. So think about like using waste like in your medium, right? Using like oil or acrylic that's normally thrown away and then like putting it back onto your canvas, right? It's a bit jarring, right? A lot of people that come see my work, they're like, that's a broken pot. What's the point, right? And that's kind of the perspective and the kind of reaction that I want, right? I want people to kind of question the work, right? And I think good art, right, a good creative practice, it creates dialogue, right? So that could be like in your own professional creative practice, or it could be in your business, right? How do you create dialogue, right? How do you create conversation within the work, okay? And I don't think that it only applies to art, right? I think it applies to business, right? It applies to entrepreneurial things, right? How do you create community, create dialogue, and ask kind of hard questions, right, within the work? And a lot of what I do is, in a way, I'm talking to myself, right? I'm kind of breaking down what I know to be true. And I think that's what good art does, right? It kind of makes you question your identity. How many of you have had like crises where you're like, who the fuck am I? Can I cuss? Yeah. Is that okay? Fuck yeah, okay, cool. Every day. A little bit of verbal caffeine for the morning. So, yeah, how many of you had like existential crises or crises? Every day. Every day, right? And I love that within artwork, right? And then creating rituals within your artwork, we can kind of get to know ourselves better, right? If that makes sense. You guys following? Next slide. And as you can see, this is obviously a kind of broken down vessel, right? And I like to create contrast within the form, right? So the smooth and the rough, right? The broken and the symmetrical, okay? I had like a whole list of notes and a whole plan for the speech. I'm just kind of going in the other direction. Are you guys following though? Yeah. Cool, cool. Next slide. So I also like to reverse like an upright vessel, right, or a downward vessel. So this is the bottom of a piece that I trimmed through, right, incorporating something that shows that mistakes or failures can also be beautiful, right? I guess following the kind of theme that I'm working with, right? I think all of us can relate to, right, failure, right, and mistakes and imperfection, right? But all those things put together can be beautiful, right, in the right context. It's another form, and these are all pieces from the show that I have in Chinatown. This was inspired by Star Wars. And as time goes on, you can see how in the beginning of the slide, there was really perfect forms, right? A teapot, a cup, right, a vase. But now as you kind of go closer to what I'm doing now, it looks more fucked up, right? How am I doing on time? Pretty good, pretty good. Yeah, and I still like to maintain elements of the thrown vessel, right? I think it's important to me, as having been a potter for so long, that I maintain the craft, right? I show that there's technical ability in what I do, okay? Here's a picture of me in the studio. You can't see me, but there's my favorite mug. Thank you. Are there any questions or any question? Yes.
I'm just curious about your creative process.
Mm-hmm.
Before you start making whatever art piece,
Mm-hmm.
do you have an idea? Like, do you draw it out on paper first? And like, what's your process?
That's a good question. So I know a lot of artists, they'll typically like sketch or draw, but the way that I see ceramics is drawing in 3D. So I have the ability to make work pretty quickly. So I like to make kind of small kind of maquettes or little models of things on the wheel before I actually make a large vessel. So for my exhibition that's going on right now, I made a lot of small kind of samples, and then if the work looks good, if it looks interesting, I'll make a larger version of it. But I rarely sketch. It's kind of funny because I recommend my students to sketch, but I never sketch. So it's kind of like one of those things where it's what, do as I say, not as I do. Right? And I have to say that a lot when I'm teaching, because I'll like not wear a mask or I'll touch the glaze. I'm like, you can't touch the glaze? I'm like, do as I say, not as I do. So, but yeah, good question. I recommend it, but I don't do it. Other question?
I'm wondering when you did your kind of your shift from like perfect to not so perfect and all the extrusion on top, was that one of your own kind of crises that you went
That's a good question. So during that shift from being a potter, I'm still a potter now, but to more of a sculptor, yeah, I was going through some like identity crises. I left a really high-paying executive director job at a ceramic studio, and I moved, going through a breakup, So you could say that, the artwork kind of reflected what my subconscious was trying to tell me, right? And that's a good question. So I think art is very telling, right, of what's going on in your life, whether you're painting or drawing or doing yarn, right? I think art really pulls from your soul, like good art does. Okay. Yeah, it's an expression of what you're going through. Ian?
Kind of along with that.
Yeah.
Were you, you're saying like subconsciously, and then you mentioned that you were kind of getting bored.
Mm-hmm.
Was it those two things meeting, or did you have some intentionality about, like you mentioned like Star Wars, so you're pulling from places. Yeah, there was that one.
Yeah.
So was it like both these things meeting? Were you, I don't know, maybe you can explain a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I pull my source material from my own personal narrative, right? And a lot of it is intuitive. Also, a lot of it is not thinking about it too much, right? So I'm a firm believer in just making a lot of work, right? So if you do want to go into full-time like artistry or becoming a maker or carpenter or in the maker space, right? I think the best thing you can do is just make a lot of work, right? And then after you make a lot of work, then you can kind of have that dialogue with it. Because a lot of the times, I personally don't have like a mind connection with my body connection, right? A lot of the times it's like, I'm just making a bunch of work because I need to. Like for example, the show that I had open last week, I had 3 months to fill 2 floors in a gallery. So that's a really, really tight timeline. And with the act of making hastily, then I was able to realize, oh, okay, this is what's going on, right? Like I'm making this broken work because I feel kind of broken and kind of fucked up, But that came later on. And yeah, it was important for me to also kind of switch what I was doing for 10 years. Right? I've been working with clay since I was 18. I'm in my 30s now. So it's been a long time. So it could be similar to like you've been working in an office job or you're feeling stuck, right? And I had to feel unstuck. I had to do something to kind of get me out of that rut. And thankfully I have the opportunity to just touch mud and then make things out of dirt. So.
Is there anything that you feel like you still haven't explored yet with the idea of like deconstructing, or do you feel like you've thoroughly explored it enough and you feel happy where you're at?
That's a good question. So this might be kind of like a disturbed artist answer, but I actually rarely like my work, or do I feel happy with what I do? And I think with making ceramics, it's more of a need to do it, right? So when we think about work, do we love going to work every day, right? And to me, it's definitely an opportunity and a privilege and honor to be able to do this full time. But when I'm thinking about what I do, a lot of it's I just need to do it. It's kind of in my DNA to make work, right, out of clay. And a little bit of my backstory, when I was a kid, I sucked at school. I'm not a math Asian, I'm sorry. Like STEM, science, I was really bad at. But when it came to things like English and literature and history and art, I really loved. And I think my parents gave up on me pretty early when it came to school. But surprisingly, I have my undergrad degree and I'm getting my master's right now, but in art. So did I answer your question? I feel like what was your question again?
Like, do you feel like you've explained, or do you feel like you personally are satisfied with where you're at with the idea of deconstructing something?
I think I'm on the way. And I would like to try out different mediums. So part of the reason why I'm getting my MFA, my master's, is so I can do multimedia, like painting, like sculpture, wire, glass, wood. Because I've been working clay for so long, and I would like to incorporate other mediums into what I'm doing. But I would say that I am happy, but I rarely feel done, right? Because if I feel done, then what else is out there, right? And I feel like the beauty of making artwork is you can go into so many different directions, right? Artwork or creative endeavors, there's always different branches that you can go into. And yeah, I want to be doing this until I die. So I want to be rolling in the mud until I'm 95.
You'll become the mud.
And I'll be one with the mud. Yeah.
Any other questions?
A question?
Getting on the topic, you were saying that you're rarely kind of happy or almost satisfied with one of your pieces.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like I can relate to that a lot. And as a, I guess, you know, as a scholar, teacher and stuff, what do you think what's the reasoning for that? Like, you know, where you're getting excited, you go through the bases, the planning, the sketching, if either it's your own or you know, you have a client, you're getting a commission. You know, you finish the work and then sometimes you go like, I don't know if this is good. I don't like it anymore. It's done, and then you're ready for the next one, or you kind of look for somebody else's kind of almost approval. And you're like, all right, well, Cliff, I'm glad you like it, but I'm ready to go. I'm done with this one. I fell out of love.
Okay, so you brought up two good points. So you brought up like the feeling of being done, and then someone else's approval, right? Are those two different clauses, right, in the question? So I'm always thinking about the next step or the next thing in what I do. And I typically have multiple like commissions or projects happening at the same time. I'm not sure how healthy that is for my mental state, but I constantly have things going on. But yeah, I don't really ever feel like I'm done, really ever, when it comes to kind of what I do. And I think the idea of having something else to look forward to kind of keeps me going. And working in ceramics is a very physically and mentally exhausting thing, right? So you guys have tried ceramics, right? Imagine doing that like 40 hours a week, right? I don't work out, I just do clay work. No, I'm just kidding, I climb too. But yeah, ceramics is very physically and mentally exhausting, so I have to be pretty methodical with how I work. In terms of people's approval, I think early on in my career, and I think most of you can attest to this, when we're younger and we're starting something new, there might be a little bit more like pressure, right, to make people feel good about what you're doing or look good, right? And I think that's a very natural human thing where we want to look good to our peers or to our employer or to our clients. But I'm in a space where I just like to do what I do and I want to make the work. And as long as I do my best, I don't really care that much if someone's like, oh, that's a broken piece of shit. You know, I'm pretty happy that I just made the work and I was able to do that, if that makes sense, if that answers your question. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, a couple questions.
Question?
Hi.
Hi.
One of the things that you brought up was incorporating, I guess, intuition into your craft.
Mm-hmm.
And you started off with being like very true to the craft of things,
True.
being technical. So I'm very curious to how you balance those things out, because a lot of times when there is guidance about using your intuition, I don't know if the final product necessarily looks technically perfect, and a lot of your work seems to balance well.
Thank
So
you.
I'm curious to know how you manage that and navigate that for yourself.
So how do I manage the kind of technical aesthetic versus like more conceptual, sculptural? That's a good question. So I think I'm a firm believer in you have to know the rules before you can, what? Break the rules, right? So I spent a lot of time learning the rules, and what's that 10,000 hour rule, like for a craft, right? You have to put in 10,000 hours to kind of master something. So I think in order to be able to do what I'm doing well, right, you have to be able to learn those technical abilities. So I'm in a space where I've learned the technical abilities, but now I want to kind of break the rules a bit, right? Kind of see what else is out there. But yeah, that's kind of, does that answer your question?
Kind of. I guess I'm curious to know also what that process is like. How do you, maybe it's asking a lot, but like how do you actually navigate?
You're asking too much. No, I'm just kidding.
Like when you pick up the sludge, as you called it, and you put it on something, I know there's a compositional element to it and how you approach it that has to balance out with the technical aesthetic of what you're doing.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So it's important for me to show that there's a technically a crafted like sound form, right, in the finished sculpture, right? But it's also important to me that I have a more conceptual narrative, right, as well. So what does that mean in terms of the aesthetic, right? So I want to show that, okay, this was a perfectly thrown pot. But there's also elements of brokenness, right, fragility, waste. So it could be a question of, okay, the conceptual versus the technical, right? Because the technical and the conceptual are two different things, right? And it's important to me that I show both. And throughout the process, in my own studio, I'll make a lot of quote unquote perfect pieces, right? So I'll have like 10, 12, 15 like perfect forms. And then I'll begin to like soak them in water or, you know, drop them on the floor, right? Break them. It's kind of chaotic the way I work. And when I'm demoing, people are like, oh my God, like that's a perfect piece, what are you doing? But that's kind of what I want to evoke, right? Like kind of letting go and not finding everything so precious, right? And not taking the making process so seriously. And so for those of you who have tried ceramics, it's really easy to kind of hold on to it, right? You're like, I want it to be perfect, right? I want it to look good. I want it to be symmetrical. But as a teacher and educator, you're not learning if your whole focus is on the actual end goal, if that makes sense, right? This is one of those like Instagram inspirational quotes. The process and the journey is the most important thing, right? And we can all attest to that, okay? I'm not an influencer, by the way, don't worry.
Any more questions? We'll take.
Did I answer your question? Sorry, I'm kind of squirrely sometimes, like with the way I think and talk. I'll go in like different directions and then I'll come back to the point. So.
All right, what made you become an educator?
That's a good question. So I had good teachers and I had bad teachers. And I had teachers who told me that I wouldn't amount to anything. I had teachers that told me that I was stupid and that I sucked, unfortunately. But I also had teachers that said, you can do whatever you want, man. Like, you're talented, right? You can be an artist if you want. And most of my mentors today and advisors are art educators, right? So some of the most impactful people in my life taught art, right? And my mom was a teacher too. And I didn't think that I would become a teacher. It kind of happened pretty organically. Someone offered me a job and hey, like, you want to teach clay? I was 23. I was like, are you sure? And they said, yeah, like, you seem like a good dude. I was like, okay. And then I started teaching, and that was about 10 years ago. And I've been teaching mostly, for the past 8-9 years, on top of being a full-time maker and artist. And I'm also going to school as well for my MFA.
One more?
More questions?
Yeah.
Oh, you want it,
I
Ian?
just wanted to how can we go see your show again?
Yeah, so the address of the show is 945 Chungking Road. And you can find it on my Instagram too. So I think you have my Instagram on here. It's just Jotham Hung Studio. And next Saturday, I'm actually having a artist talk and demonstration at the gallery. I know it's kind of far. Are you guys all from OC? Or are you guys all? So it's a little far, but I'll make sure it's worth your time. I'll be breaking some stuff and putting things back together and giving you a tour of the show.
One more.
Question?
I guess it just comes back to like the global topic on like ritual.
Mhm.
So like you're pretty like A-type, you seem to be getting it done. So you got like a morning ritual that you kind of run to me. Because you gotta do this perfectism, and then you get to the point where like you're down to like just break everything and fuck everything up, right? Is that part of the ritual?
That's part of the ritual.
Is it like a lengthy ritual, or is there like a daily routine?
Are you talking about like my personal like morning routine or just in the studio?
Just your concept on the ritual, since that's like.
Yeah, so as it pertains to the artwork, I think part of the ritual is the degradation of the work, right? In order for me to make these sculptures well, right, I need to kind of capture the process that involves like breakages, right, failure, degrading. And I think that with artwork, some of the best artwork can relate to human beings, right, can relate to the human experience. And I think we've all felt broken, right, or we've gone through stuff, or we've made mistakes. But when we're able to kind of capture those things and grow from those things, that's when it's beautiful, right? And beauty is subjective, obviously, but yeah, like as to your question about like the ritual in the work, the ritual is also in preparation, right? Clay needs to be prepared well, right? So when I don't prepare the clay well, it's not going to work, right? When you're putting a piece of mud on a metal disc, right? If it's hard and soft and it's not prepared well, it won't operate well, right? It won't be malleable, it won't be plastic. So a lot of ceramics is preparation. So like kneading, like wedging the clay, like if you're making pasta or bread, right? You're kneading it. So preparation is important. The making part is important as well. And I would say it's very much a ritual in conjunction with the preparation, right? I hope that answers your question. I feel like I'm talking more about ritual now than the actual talk. This is good, this is good. I had a whole like sheet of notes and I gone like haywire, so. That's a good question. So I still make pottery. Yeah, I love making pottery. I think being a potter will forever be my roots. But I oscillate between like utilitarian, like functional work and sculptural. And for me, the sculptural work is almost cathartic, right? It's like I'm breaking things and I'm putting my hands in like material waste. And so it's a more experiential, maybe even emotional process, whereas making pottery feels very comfortable for me. So I was a production potter for a while, and I would make 100 cups or mugs for a restaurant or for a hotel, right? So it was a very meditative, almost, yeah, monotone process. But with sculpture, it's a very visceral, like, experiential process where I'm no longer doing the same thing over and over and over again. It's still satisfying in certain ways, but it's a very different mindset. Making pottery and craft, I think to your question about the technicality of ceramics, I'm more focused on the technical with making pottery because your lips touch it, it holds liquid, right? The handle in the mug should feel a certain way, whereas with conceptual, sculptural artwork, I can kind of go into any direction, right? I have less constraints, if that makes sense. So it's two different processes that I still really enjoy doing, and I love doing both. So making small pottery is kind of a break for me, pun intended. Cool.